Mhm.
Hello there. Hello there, everyone. I am so happy to be here. This week, I will continue reading from Living A Course in Miracles by Dr. John Mundy. He is an amazing teacher. He's been teaching this for years, probably the longest living teacher there is. Um, I know that he he was there practically from the beginning. So his teaching style is really great. He has a great sense of humor. He's a wonderful writer. And the last chapter that we started was chapter 5. And what he was doing was he was introducing the cast of characters, not the cast of characters in the story of how the course came about, but the actual quote unquote characters in A Course in Miracles. And I like the way he made this into a story. It's actually a course telling us how exactly step by step we can get back home to God. And there are terms in the course that do not have the same definition that we've come to know, such terms as the ego, such terms as the atonement. So he's introducing several of these terms as characters, like characters in a story. And I think this was a wonderful idea. I started introducing the characters last week and I had to stop in the middle. So what I think I'm going to do is start from the beginning of the characters, which there are about 14 of them, but 16, excuse me. But I want to make sure that this isn't chopped up. So we actually get a good picture of who's important in the course and exactly what these terms mean, in terms of what the course is trying to teach us. So we will start with how the mind works according to A Course in Miracles. Okay, 1, life is thought and God is life. We are small t thought, which thought that we could be separate from capital T thought. We can imagine life without a body, but we cannot imagine life without a mind. Life cannot be delimited by a plant, an animal, a human body, or anything. Life does not begin with the birth of a body. Life does not end with the death of a body. Life is a constant, eternal. The body is impermanence, finite. In the minds of men, then, wars also end in the minds of men. Everything is projection. Oops. Oh my goodness, I skipped a page. Sorry. Okay, go back to the body is impermanence, finite. When you made visible what is not true, what is true became invisible to you. 2, thought comes first. God created thought. Before anything, idea or object, can come into existence, it is first a thought. God did not create the external. God could not create that which is not of God. God did not create the ego. God did not create a meaningless world. The world we see is on the outside and of our own making. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shined in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. 3. Complete abstraction is the natural condition of the mind. Love is abstract and cannot be defined. Yet we all agree that there is something called love. God is abstract and cannot be defined, yet most folks agree that there is a God. The mind that taught itself to think specifically can no longer grasp abstraction in the sense that it is all encompassing. We need to see a little, that we learn a lot. Thinking specifically means thinking about the body, the world, and all the idols, all the external things the body's eyes see. Abstract thought applies to knowledge. Perception is always specific. Life seems to take form in bodies, and therefore they appear as real. Yet bodies are ephemeral and last only a moment in time, and time itself is an illusion. Divine abstraction, God, takes joy in sharing that which is in creation. And why are you concerned about a speck in your brother's eye, but consider not the beam in your own eye? Or how will you say to your brother, let me pull the mote out of your eye, and behold, a beam blocks your own vision? First, remove the beam from your brother's eye, from your own eye, and then you shall see clearly how to cast out the mote from your brother's eye. 4, projection makes perception. This simple 3-word sentence, which appears twice in the course, is straightforward, profound, and yet not easily understood. Because we are so persistently engaged in projection that we do not see that we are projecting. We do not realize that we are making up the world we see. We see the world as insane, and we do not see that we are the image maker. The purpose of all seeing is to show us what we wish to see, and all hearing brings to mind the sounds we expect to hear. According to the Heisenberg principle in physics, it is impossible for the perceiver not to affect the object perceived. The preamble to UNESCO begins with the phrase, "Wars begin in the minds of men." If war begins in the minds of men, then wars also end in the minds of men. Everything is a projection, an assertion. From the first cry of the infant coming out of the womb onward. Projection makes perception, and perception means interpretation. We superimpose our interpretations on the world, thus believing that what we see is reality. The ego analyzes, the Holy Spirit accepts. The basic difference between the ordinary ego mind, which includes most all of our thinking most all of the time, and miracle mindedness is that the ordinary ego mind is a projector. Miracle mindedness is receptive rather than projective. It simply sees. It simply is. In the holy instant, when time stops, it ceases. Tides. We see truly. Miracle mindedness sees without the contamination of the ego, without projecting anything onto the world. We cannot be projective and receptive at the same time. 5. The ultimate purpose of projection is always to get rid of guilt. If we did not feel guilty, we would not project. Guilt stands in the way of our remembering God. So we try to get rid of it by projecting it outward. 6. Ideas leave not their source. We never left home, heaven, because the impossible cannot happen. It is precisely because ideas do not leave their source that I am not a body. I am a mind. Seeing how I am a mind, the inner teacher, the Holy Spirit, is going to get through at the level it can get through, and that is the level of mind. As ideas do not leave their source, we cannot be separate from God. The idea of God has never left the mind that thought it, which is why, in order to be whole, I must give my whole mind back to God. In the same way, the idea of guilt does not leave its starting place in the mind. The idea of separation has never left the mind that thought it. For this reason, I am never angry at someone else. I am always angry at myself. Since the Holy Spirit is in your mind can also believe only what is true. The Holy Spirit can speak only for this, because he speaks for God. He tells you to return your whole mind to God, because it has never left him. When I was 18 years old, I listened to a cassette tape by Earl Nightingale called The Greatest Secret in the World. According to Nightingale, the greatest secret in the world was that we become what we think about, or we are what we think about. What seems to be external is not outside the mind. What I see is witness to my thoughts. The world I perceive is a representation of my mind, the outside picture of an inward condition. Or, as someone once said, the universe constantly rearranges itself to accommodate my interpretation of reality. Workbook lesson 35 is, my mind is part of God's. I am very holy. This is obviously not the way we see ourselves. It is, however, the way things are in truth. Perception can be changed. The object of perception cannot be changed. Our thoughts change our lives. Get it, and you will get it. Do not forget that your will has power over all fantasies and dreams. Trust it to see you through. and carry you beyond them all. 7. The thoughts we think are not our real thoughts. Life is thought. Life is God. Our real thoughts are those thoughts we think in line with the mind of God. When we do not think like God, we are not really thinking. All thoughts of aloneness, isolation, pain, guilt, and fear are not real. All thoughts which stand outside of the mind of God are fantasies, wishes, illusion, or dreams. All of our secret thoughts, things we think we cannot share, are equally unreal. Like all dreams, they last a moment and then they disappear. They are distortions of reality. They are make-believe or made up. When someone alters their appearance by decorating their face, we call it makeup. We make up a world. Our fantasies, dreams, and illusions are not true. And there is a place inside us which knows these thoughts are temporal, not eternal, and therefore not real. And yet, yourself retains its thoughts, and they remain within your mind and in the mind of God. 8. There are no neutral thoughts. Our thoughts are fearful or loving, but never neutral. There are no idle thoughts. All thinking produces form at some level. This is true both within the dream world, this world, and the real world, heaven. Within the context of this world, my thoughts create a temporal, artificial, and fearful world. 9. The real world is a state in which there is no good and evil. Dutch philosopher Benedict de Spinoza observed that if men were born free, they would, so long as they remained free, form no conception of good and evil. Although it is not so in this world, in illusion, in reality, there is no division. Thus again, there is no decision. Knowledge never involves comparison. The real world can actually be perceived. All that is necessary is a willingness to perceive nothing else. For if you perceive both good and evil, you are accepting both the false and the true, and making no distinction between them. 10. Our only problem is our belief in separation. There is only one solution: the acceptance of atonement, undoing of the ego, which means that the separation never happened. It just looks like it did. The separation actually never occurred. It was and is all a dream. We come to this memory through the process of forgiveness, by letting the world be what it is without projecting onto it. When we stop projecting our perception, we experience oneness. Only then do we experience true empathy. Only then can we be truly helpful. Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. That is because it contains a hint of recognition that the ego is not the self. 11. There are no private thoughts. Minds are joined, and only minds communicate. One brother is all brothers, and every mind contains all minds. Just as the idea of separation has to be shared before there can be separation. As oneness is shared, so is there only oneness. Joy, peace, oneness, and love come in an integrated willingness to share and promote the mind's natural impulse to respond as one. Our only completely meaningful relationship is with God, who is oneness. We know the oneness of God as we literally share that oneness with every other mind. 12. Only minds communicate. And minds do not need bodies to communicate. The body can only do what the mind directs it to do. While the body, in service to the ego, can certainly hurt other bodies, minds cannot hurt. We're all familiar with the truth in the old children's adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. To communicate is to join. To attack is to separate. Although minds can communicate, they can communicate only in love. Everything else is a form of separation or miscommunication. 13. We are never alone in experiencing the effects of our seeing. I can call upon my loving thoughts, which share everything with everyone. As thoughts of separation disconnect me from others, my real thoughts awaken real thoughts in others. Just as hiding makes us miserable, nothing is more delightful than sharing. Joy comes in sharing. This is love. God is love. 14. Everything I say, do, or think teaches the universe. Wow. We are all, at times, students and teachers. We teach the course by living the course. If the center of the thought system is true, only truth extends from it. But if a lie is at its center, only deception proceeds from it. 15. All false systems of belief fail. The totalitarian system of communism failed because it was a totalitarian system. We cannot be made equal by taking away freedom. Many years ago, I became aware of what seemed to be a Course in Miracles cult, formed around a charismatic leader. Concerned about this possible misinterpretation of the Course, I called Ken Wapnick. Ken's response was to quote a piece of scripture, which said, If this be of God, there is nothing you can do to stop it. And if it is not of God, it will come to naught. A study of history shows the ego always implodes. When it does, truth automatically comes to the fore. 16. I am determined to see. Love can replace fear. Laughter can replace tears. Abundance can replace loss. It is not only possible for my will and the will of God to be one, it is the only way, the only truth there is. Who is in charge of the mind? The Course says that you, the decision maker, are in charge of the journey, the sonship, the process of atonement, the second coming, the kingdom, and the universe. Engaging in the process of purification, undoing the ego, and aligning my mind with the mind of God, I know these statements to be true. When you let your mind be drawn to bodily concerns, to things you buy, to eminence as valued by the world, you ask for sorrow, not for happiness. Boy, the Course is pretty uncompromising, isn't it? Who is it that lets the mind be drawn? And when I see that I am letting the mind be drawn down a path of miscreation, can I refocus the mind so that I can get the results that I want truly and not simply something of the world? Into whose service do I place the mind? And who is the I that does the placing? We never stop being decision makers. We can give the mind into the service of the one who can lead us to our true home, and not simply turn it over to mindlessness, a place where we wander around lost in a dreaming of the world. Your mind cannot be stopped in this unless you choose to stop it. The title of this section is Stop It. There is a television clip with comedian Bob Newhart from the 1980s where Bob plays the part of a psychiatrist. A woman comes into his office for counseling and Bob tells her that the consultation will be $5 in advance. And she says, $5 in advance? Why $5? He says, I charge $1 per minute, and this will only take 5 minutes. So she says, very well, and she gives him $5. He then says, how can I help you? She says, I am afraid of being buried alive in a box. He says, well, stop that. She says, you mean I should just stop thinking about that? He says, yes, stop it. Then she says she has another problem. He asks her what it is, and she says she lets men take advantage of her. And he says, well, stop it. Correction is not, of course, always so instantaneous, but the principle remains the same. Not until I realize that I have a choice and I decide to follow the voice for God, can I indeed make that decision. When judgment ceases, healing occurs. Judgment dissipates as we change the way we look at things. Vigilance, watching our thoughts, requires effort until it does not require any effort. We've been judging all our lives And we don't just stop judgment. Watch what is going on without making judgments about what is going on. Not judging does not mean not making simple judgments or what might be called discernments. Am I having eggs or oatmeal for breakfast? Or what am I going to wear? What we're wearing doesn't make much difference unless we're into power dressing or sexy dressing, in which case we are trying to manipulate the universe. Dress the way regular people do, dress to be comfortable. What we're watching for is projection, condemnation, criticism, attack, and blame. If I condemn my brother, I condemn someone that God condemns not. Condemnation is not of God. To condemn my brother is to place a crown of thorns upon my own head and to nail myself to a cross. Try fasting from judging. See it and stop it. See it and stop it. The ego always speaks first. We're trying to retrain the mind. So think more than twice before speaking. Look at the world without adding anything to it. Just see it as it is. Let it be what it is. The world has always been the domain of the ego. It always will be. It is something which is happening in time. For this reason, there will never be a solution to terrorism in this world. In heaven, there is no such thing as terrorism. There could not be. You are timeless, and from a position of timelessness, you can see it. Being thus above the battlefield. I am no better or any worse than anyone else. My needs are no more important than anyone else's, and I recognize my inherent oneness with all things. Seeing this is truly loving. A holy instant is any moment in which, by not judging, I do not see myself as separate. Psychotherapy works when the therapist does not judge his client. There are, of course, differences in form, but not in content. God literally has no favorite sons, no favorite daughters. As my friend, Reverend Sarah Emery says it, why don't we just say things the way they are? We are one. Miracles are thoughts. Thoughts can represent the lower or bodily level of experience or the higher or spiritual level of experience. One makes the physical, the other creates the spiritual. Putting it in hyperdrive. What do we mean by taking things to a higher or spiritual level? In the original Star Wars trilogy, our hero, Han Solo, played by Harrison Ford, and his companions are able to escape Darth Vader and the evil empire by putting their spacecraft, the Millennium Falcon, into hyperdrive, thus taking it to another dimension. In the same way, when we move from the ego mind, mindlessness, to the higher mind, mindfulness, we go to a higher dimension outside of time and space and our ordinary ways of thinking. We switch from the ego to spirit, from eyes of fear to eyes of love, from being projective to being receptive. After Dr. Bill Thetford retired, when someone asked him what he was doing, he would say that he was practicing forgiveness. Until I have brought my mind completely in line with the mind of God, I keep asking, is this a truly loving thought, or am I projecting? If it is coming from guilt or fear, if it is someplace I am hiding, if it is coming out of anger, if it is a form of vengeance, I can be sure that it is not true and I need to take it to a higher level. I need another way of seeing. The last lesson in A Course in Miracles is repeated in lessons 361 to 365. The holy instant, this holy instant would I give to you. Be you in charge, for I would follow you, certain that your direction gives me peace. Chapter 6, the dynamics of the ego. Demythologizing Adam and Eve. The Garden of Eden, or the pre-separation condition, was a state of mind in which nothing was needed. When Adam listened to the lies of the serpent, all he heard was untruth. You do not have to continue to believe what is not true unless you choose to do so. Becoming disillusioned. How did the ego get started? No matter how much it may appear to be otherwise, we are not an ego and we are not a body. Being a belief or a dream, the ego never got started, but it sure looks like it did. The deeper question is not how did the ego get started, but why do we perpetuate it? Why can't we stop it? Why can't we let it go? Being immersed in the ego is like not being able to see the forest for the trees. How do we let go of an illusion if we do not know that we are caught in one? After all, the main quality of an illusion is that it is an illusion. In the 3rd chapter of the book of Genesis, in the beginning of the Bible, we find the most fundamental myth of the Western world, basic to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. This myth explains the origin and persistence of the ego. Adam, man, and Eve, woman, are created in a state of innocent, unself-consciousness. Adam bites into the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and suddenly his eyes are opened. Duality comes into the mind, and Adam thinks it possible to think a thought outside of the mind of God. Man is now seemingly cast out of heaven, oneness, and thrown into hell, duality. Trying to live in duality is an ambiguity. Adam and Eve, man, woman, you, me, us, we decided that it was possible to live outside of the mind of God. This thought is a kind of curse, a kind of temporal but not eternal damnation. It is not possible to be separated from God, eternity. In time, however, in the past several million years or more, several billion of us have been trying to think a thought outside of the mind of God. We listen not to the voice for God. We listen instead to a voice that tells us preposterous things. It says it's okay to be selfish. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to look for fault and find the error. It's okay to attack. We can even, in righteousness, go to war and kill our brothers and sisters with complete justification. Hurting someone else, however, is never a joyful experience. We cannot inflict pain upon another without inflicting it upon ourselves. Into eternity, where all is one, there crept a tiny, mad idea at which the Son of God remembered not to laugh. We might think of the Big Bang as the first projection, the first formation of form out of formlessness, the first thought of individuality that thought to separate itself from thought of God. Before the Big Bang, there was no division, no separation, no splintering off of the mind, and there was no time. The ego lives in time, in history, in a story. The magnitude of this one thought, projection/error, is so vast that a world of unreality emerges from it, like a mirror which is dropped and shatters. A kind of fractal splintering off of consciousness occurs, breaking repeatedly into trillions upon trillions of individual pieces of non-reality. Shame and guilt have come into the mind. Something has happened that was not supposed to happen. We now have self and other, good and bad, pretty and ugly, and all of it requires judgment. Defenses of all sorts suddenly become necessary. We have judgment, we have separation and division. We do not have the whole. We do not have vastness. We do not have the infinite. We have instead the concrete, the physical, the material, the mundane, and the limited. There is no mention of an apple in the book of Genesis. I have sometimes joked that the fabled apple might have been a mushroom that is some kind of psychotropic. Adam was but human. This explains it all. He did not want the apple for the apple's sake. He wanted it only because it was forbidden. The mistake was in not forbidding the serpent. Then he would have eaten the serpent. American author Mark Twain, who had a great sense of humor. Ego defense mechanisms. Let's leave Adam in the bushes for a moment and talk about modern psychology. Although Eastern philosophy has for centuries been onto the ego, it was not until the development of German idealistic philosophy of the 18th and 19th centuries that the role of the ego was more clearly seen in the West. German philosopher J.G. Fichte said that seeing how the ego was the determiner of the world we see, shouldn't the ego be the primary thing that philosophy studies? It is Austrian psychiatrist Sigmund Freud, however, who explains in depth the variety of ego defense mechanisms available for us. Thanks to Freud, his daughter, Anna Freud, Carl Jung, and the founders of modern depth psychology, we now have more clarity about the origin, structure, and evolution of the mechanism of the ego. Freud was an atheist, and while he understood the ego very well, he thought the mind was limited to the brain. He did not take the Eastern philosophical position that the ego was unreal. He was studying, after all, something which looked very real. He thought that we were stuck with the ego, damned with it, if you will. There was simply no way out. But the Course is saying what mystical philosophy has always said is, there is a way out. The dynamics of the ego will be our lesson for a while, for we must look first at this to see beyond it. Since you have made it real, we will undo this error quietly together, and then look beyond it to truth. Defenses are the mechanisms we use to protect ourselves from what we perceive as threats from the outside world. They are the ways we try to build up and protect our own world. They are the means by which we promote separation. Defenses are insane thoughts simply because they are broken off from the whole. They are secret magic wands we wave when truth appears to threaten what we believe about ourselves. They are foolish guardians of mad illusions. The primary defenses are denial and projection. Consider what the ego wants defenses for. Always to justify what goes against the truth, flies in the face of reason, and makes no sense. Defenses are the costliest of all the prices which the ego would exact. Denial is the first line of defense. Lie, hide, don't look, go unconscious, run away, knock ourselves out with alcohol or a drug, etc. While each of the defenses takes on a variety of forms, three of the most obvious forms of denial are hiding or lying, dissociation, and addictive behaviors. There are obvious overlaps. For example, we lie about, hide, or deny addictive behaviors. Lying is a form of hiding. What is the first thing that Adam does after his eyes are opened and he is able to distinguish between good and evil? He hides in the bushes. According to the Bible, God goes looking for Adam in the cool of the day. God finds Adam in the bushes and he says, "Why are you hiding?" Adam had never hidden from God before. There would have been no need for it. Now things have changed, and Adam says, "Because I was naked." And God says, "Who told you that you were naked?" Where did this idea of naked come from? Where there was simply being, there is now a body, a past, a future, and a story. And you have done a stranger thing than you yet realize. You have displaced your guilt to your body from your mind. The experience of shame or guilt, dirty, stinky, awful guilt, has come into the mind. Adam has been exposed. He has a body, and his guilt is related not just to anybody, but a naked body. It also has something to do with sex. So Adam must now hide his shame. Lying is a primary defense we learn as children. When we get into a little bit of trouble and need to protect ourselves, we just tell a lie. After all, who is going to know? The problem is, of course, that someone knows. We know. This deepens our experience of guilt because we have separated ourselves from the one we have lied to, and thus from the whole or oneness. And our guilt automatically produces a fear of punishment. The first person you probably lied to, which produced an experience of guilt and separation, was your mother. It probably happened a little bit like this. Mother walked into your room, saw a mess and said, "What happened here?" And you said, "I don't know." Or we might quickly go to projection. "I think the dog did it." Projection occurs when you believe that some emptiness or lack exists in you and that you can fill it with your own ideas instead of truth. While our first choice is often to run away, hide, or dissociate, the ego's major choice for defense is attack or projection. God presses Adam to tell him a little more about what has happened. Adam goes to the second line of defense and comes up with Eve. What other choice did he have? Eve gave me this fruit and I did eat thereof. God goes to Eve and says, "Look, Eve, what happened?" Eve immediately goes to the second line of defense and says, "The serpent did beguile me and I did eat thereof." Projection is a more obvious form of defense. Indeed, the mind can be very busily engaged in projection. To project means to hurl out or to throw away. Projection reinforces the belief in separation. When we project, we make ourselves different from and more important than that onto which we project, thereby reinforcing our belief in separation. The purpose of projection is to get rid of guilt. Anger always involves projection of separation, which must ultimately be accepted as one's own responsibility, rather than being blamed on others. Oh, it is 4 o'clock, and I must take a break here and continue next Friday, hopefully. We will begin with anger and attack in the chapter entitled The Dynamics of the Ego. This is exciting stuff. It was not my intention, but this chapter definitely is pretty relevant to what is going on in the world right now. We do have a situation in the illusion where bodies are being killed, and it is very sad for all of us. What we want to remember is that in the illusion, there will always be situations like this. We cannot escape it. All we can do is forgive it. Thank you so much for being with me and allowing me to share the teachings of John Mundy. I love you all, and I will be with you again next week.
Thank you, Lydia. God bless you and have a great week.